Hey you guys, time once again for Flickers of Fear, my little movie review series. If you hear some weird noises in the background, it's just rain, Florida and summer, y'all. So anyway, let's get started. So, alright, I can't remember exactly how I ended up first hearing about this movie, which is called Broadcast Signal Intrusion, and it came out back in 2021. Now, the title, I guess, must have stuck in my mind because as soon as I was, scrolling through my Amazon Prime, the free-to-me horror section, and I saw it pop up on there, I was kind of like, oh, I think I heard about that or something. I couldn't, remember where, but I was like, oh, I kind of felt compelled to, watch it. Now, at first, I thought that I had heard about it, because remember, back a while ago, we did a show about creepy YouTube videos, sort of iconic creepy ones. And I was like, oh, well, because this movie kind of has a little bit of that going on in it, well, actually, a lot of that going on in it, I was like, oh, I must have heard it mentioned in relation to that. But then I looked up, and we did that creepy YouTube show, way the fuck back in October of 2020, and this movie didn't come out until, well, it premiered at South by Southwest in March of 2021, and then it came out in, wide release in October of 21. So it couldn't have been research into that, made me think of this movie. So I have no idea, where I first heard of this, but for whatever reason, the title of it or the image of the cover or something like that stuck in my mind because I was kind of like, oh yeah, I gotta see that. I heard about it. So I don't know. So anyway, I ended up watching it. Now, the movie was directed by Jacob Gentry. Now, he also co-wrote and co-directed the excellent 2007 horror movie, if you haven't seen it, it's called The Signal. I have seen it, but I don't think I've reviewed it on this channel, actually. I should probably get around to doing that. He also did the My Super Psycho Sweet 16 trilogy, which I haven't seen and don't appear to be on available, at least on DVD or, I couldn't find them on Amazon. I mean, they're there, but they say they're unavailable, so I don't know what that's all about. I think it's an MTV series or movies or something like that. I don't really know, but he did that too. So this movie in particular, if you kind of like horror that's sort of something like a downbeat noir kind of vibe, and if you're real into plots involving eerie conspiracy theories, then this movie will probably be right up your alley, or right down your rabbit hole, in a more apt phrase, although it sounds kind of dirty. I will warn you, though, that the ending of this movie is kind of abrupt and anticlimactic, and the mystery isn't really resolved. Although I will say, too, in the movie's defense, that a close watch of it, it doesn't really spell everything out for you, but there are a lot of possible theories if you kind of watch it and pick up all the little details along the way. When I get to the end, because I don't really want to spoil too much of it, but when I get to the end, I might do a little spoiler thing and say what I think what was going on in there, but we'll see when we get there. So, because the thing about it is that the point of this movie is not really, and you don't really know this going in until the end of it, and then you start thinking about it. The point of the movie isn't really to be a cut and dried mystery per se, but it's kind of more a psychological horror, a psychological examination. But I can understand that some viewers were really frustrated by the end of it, what the fuck, what happened. And I kind of felt like that at first too. I was just kind of well, what, okay, if that's how you're gonna end your movie. But then I kept thinking about it, because I watched it yesterday, and I was, thinking about it, and I was like, oh, I see what you did there. Okay, I know what you're getting at. It is a little bit frustrating, though, the ending, but it's kind of one of those movies that probably you need a couple of watches. So if you're into real kind of, I don't want to say it's a puzzle story kind of, but it's something that leaves a lot of stuff to be theorized about, which is really interesting because it's kind of meta in the way that it examines why people are drawn to conspiracy theories, and then it almost kind of makes you want to do your own conspiracy theory about this movie and come up with your own theories about it, which I thought was actually pretty clever and didn't really occur to me until about probably an hour after I watched it, you know what I mean? So there's that. So Broadcast Signal Intrusion is set in Chicago in 1999. Our main character is this guy named James, and he's played by Harry Shum Jr., who most people will probably recognize from Glee. So James's wife, Hanna, mysteriously disappeared 3 years prior, so in 1996. All that was found of her was her abandoned car left on a bridge. Possibly because of his grief. I mean, he still hasn't gotten over it. James is a loner, And the only time he really ever interacts with people is he goes to this, presumably like a support group for people that have lost loved ones, and he does kind of interact with one woman there, but other than that, not so much. He kind of like keeps to himself. And he seems to have found the ideal job for his kind of like reclusive proclivities, I guess. He works in the basement of this Chicago TV station, and his job is archiving all their old broadcasts and like for their library, you know what I mean? Now, his interactions with his boss or his supervisor, who you never see, are conducted entirely through Post-it notes, which to me, I was like, wow, this is my ideal job too. I never have to see another fucking person, and people just, if you want something, leave me a note and then like just leave me alone the rest of the time. Sweet. So like I could understand that, because like I said, I'm kind of one of those people, like the fewer people that I have to interact with like on a daily basis, like the happier I am generally. So one day when he's archiving old footage, which is his job obviously, James stumbles across this bizarre, what they call a broadcast signal intrusion, and it was something that interrupted a local newscast back in 1987. If you've ever seen the real life, very iconic viral creepy video, which is called I Feel Fantastic, with the Ciarra the android like kind of like going around like singing and stuff, you'll understand like the vibe of what this video looks like. I mean, it's clearly very influenced by I Feel Fantastic. So the short clip that he finds that interrupted the broadcast for, several seconds or whatever it was, it has like either a person in a mask or it could be an android, and they're kind of like open and closing their mouth and like swaying back and forth. They're kind of in this weird room that maybe isn't like a whole entire room. And there's all kind of these weird, like, disturbing, like, distorted sounds, like, going on in the background. So James gets curious about this, as you would, and he starts to do, like, some perfunctory research on one of the old school, like, BBS message boards, because, like I said, this is set in 1999. And from this research, he discovers that there was actually another similar intrusion that occurred the same year, like a month or two later, something like that, during the broadcast of a sci-fi show called Don Kronos. Now, the show Don Kronos is this movie universe's version of Doctor Who. And the reason that they're doing that is because all of this is a very direct reference to a real life event, which maybe a lot of you watching will have heard of. It was called the Max Headroom signal hijacking, in which some as yet identified person broke into the broadcast of two Chicago TV stations, one time during a newscast and one time during a Doctor Who episode. And the guy or girl was wearing a Max Headroom mask, was kind of like swaying around, being weird, and like maybe like I think the second one they were talking about Coca-Cola or some shit like that. So it was like really weird, and it's one of the most famous like unsolved like signal intrusions like of all time. And I feel like most people that have lived on the internet for any length of time have heard about it. But that's what this is directly referencing, why it's set in Chicago, why there's a sci-fi show, why it was a newscast. So they did that very deliberately. So, and that's one of the things that I really liked about this, because there's actually like a lot of references to real life events other than that, like threaded throughout the movie. And I will say too that I really think like this whole creepy shit about like unexplained YouTube videos like that are really weird are really kind of like a fertile ground for horror, because there's always something really unsettling about them. Another thing too, like another reference that I noticed in this that I thought was really funny, and it's actually like it's pretty obscure, I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I kind of perceived it as being pretty obscure. Okay, in the movie, like the weird I Feel Fantastic-esque videos that show up in this, okay, the character, like the android or the mask or something like that, that the person is portraying in this video, is supposed to be a character, or like sort of like a janky, like cheap-ass version of a character that's named Sal E. Sparks. So in the movie's universe, there's this absurd like 80s sitcom called Stepbot, and the character in these videos is supposed to be like referencing that character, like an android housewife. Now, this is a reference to a real life sitcom from the 1980s, which was called Small Wonder, in which the dad of the main family, I think, builds an android daughter. I don't know why. I don't remember the reasons why he built it. I'm sure the reasons were like nothing good, because it sounds like not really all that wholesome, if I'm being honest. But I just thought that was like kind of funny that they're actually referencing, like in the movie, there's Stepbot, there's an android character, and they're referencing like that real like 80s sitcom. So I thought that was like kind of entertaining. So when James goes digging back through the TV station's archives to find this particular Don Kronos broadcast that supposedly had this second signal intrusion on it, he finds out that it's missing from their library. And his boss gives him I guess presumably he sends a note to his boss about it, and his boss like sends him a note back and says, oh, well, the tape was confiscated by the FCC because, you know, going into like a TV broadcast, like pirating into a TV broadcast is illegal, obviously. So you get the FCC, you get the FBI involved and stuff like that. So there had been an investigation, and the tape was confiscated during the course of that investigation. The boss also says pretty much just drop it, you know, it's not really that big a deal. But James does happen to locate a fan of the show, Don Kronos, who had taped the episode on Betamax, like back in the 80s, and so he has it. So he kind of like trades it to James. So James notices, just from these two broadcast signal intrusions so far, that both of the intrusions correspond with the days just before the disappearances of two local women. He also finds out that there is a fabled third intrusion, which some people say does not exist. There's like a kind of rumors about it, which was supposed to have occurred the day before his wife vanished. So he becomes convinced that there's a connection between all of this stuff. So he contacts one of the dudes who was involved in the initial like FCC and FBI investigation. I guess he worked for the FCC, or he headed up the task force or whatever. Now, he goes to see the guy, and the guy insists, is like, look, we investigated this shit for 3 years. We never found the person that did it, but we're pretty convinced that we couldn't find any connection between these intrusions and the killer, like, or kidnapper or whoever. You know, we looked into every possible lead, and we just didn't find anything. So he basically says to James, you really need to stop obsessing over this. There's nothing there. He says something about don't go down a rabbit hole that you can't get out of. Like, this is going to ruin your life, pretty much. But naturally, James does not listen to reason, and he gets subsequently, like, sucked deeper and deeper into the mystery. He's pretty adamant that not only are these, you know, weird intrusions, like, connected to the missing women, but I'm going to be the one to solve this, even though many people before him have tried. So along his ever unraveling journey, he comes across a whole host of, like, weird kind of things and people, including another dude who apparently went down the same rabbit hole and is now kind of this crazed, homeless, and suicidal guy. He meets this strange woman named Alice, get it? Who follows him around for a while, seemingly for shits and giggles, before eventually, like, kind of meeting up with him and joining him in his investigation. And you kind of meet all these really sketchy people and all these really weird situations that are left ambiguous enough that when you're watching it, you're not really sure if there's really something nefarious going on, like if there actually is a connection between these videos and the kidnapping of the women or the disappearance of the women, or whether James's kind of crumbling mental state is finding patterns and connections where there aren't any. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is actually a really intriguing movie. It has a great premise. Like I said, everything is like all about creepy YouTube videos and conspiracies and shit like that. It has a really cool, like, noir sensibility. Like, even the score is like kind of a jazzy noir-esque kind of score. And like I said, the videos themselves are like super creepy. Like I said, if you've seen I Feel Fantastic, like, that's creepy, but this is like even creepier than that, but it's along those lines. But I do agree that, I mean, if you're just watching this thinking it's going to be like a conspiracy and like everything's going to be resolved at the end, then at the end you might be like, what the fuck did I just watch? And you might get mad because the end is like kind of abrupt and a lot of stuff is kind of left unanswered. You're kind of like, well, did all this stuff really happen, or was it all in James's imagination or something like that? And I'm going to say I'm inclined to believe the latter, that I don't think everything that happened was in James's imagination, but I do think like some of the shit that happened was real and some of the people he talked to were real. But the thing about it is that I think the intention of the movie, and I'm pretty sure that the intention of the movie was not to be a conspiracy style mystery in that form. It was kind of like, I think it's more exploring how the sort of like psychological fragility engendered by grief or uncertainty can lead a person kind of down these paths of like unhealthy obsession where they're starting to look for meaning where there isn't any. So they're finding like all these meaningless deeds, because there's a lot of stuff like that, like peppered throughout the film. Like as he goes along this, you know, ride and talks to like all these various people about what he thinks is this big conspiracy, many people like kind of warn him off it. Like people say things like that, like, oh, you know, maybe nothing means anything or something like that. So I kind of feel like they're going more into it as, because he doesn't have any closure over what happened to his wife because she just disappeared, and he really very much wants closure. So he's trying to sort of like find something that will give her disappearance meaning. He wants to find out what happened to her, and he just really wants everything resolved and tied up with a bow, but life isn't really like that. Now, I have seen, and this is kind of like spoiler territory, although, like I said, you can bring your own theories to it, because I don't think there's any one particular answer. I think there could be a couple different theories. I'm kind of the opinion, I thought the first time that I watched it, again, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, I kind of thought, after I finished watching it, that James had actually killed his wife and couldn't deal with it, and like dissociated, and then was sort of like constructed most of this sort of like conspiracy, which most of which was like built around like real things, like, but he tied all the tendrils together like in a way that maybe absolved him and made it seem like this bigger conspiracy. But it works either way. I kind of feel like it could be too that because she was found, well, she wasn't found, like what she disappeared and all that was found was her car and it was on a bridge. It could be, and I've seen this theory kind of put forth as well, that she actually just committed suicide and he can't really deal with that either, maybe thinking that he's guilty for like causing her, like driving her to it because of something that he did. And there's kind of hints toward that as well, so it could also go in that direction. But largely, I don't think that this movie is saying that all of this conspiracy stuff really happened. I think that it's more exploring the psychological breakdown of a person who can't deal, like I said, with grief, with uncertainty, with not having closure what happened to their loved one. So they're just constructing like, this big like edifice of meaning when out of like meaningless things or things that are not connected. So it's kind of like looking into how people get sucked into this type of stuff, like how people get sucked into conspiracy theories. So I think it's kind of like in that. As I said, I think maybe sometimes like the ending might be frustrating for some viewers, but if you think about it, and if you watch this a second time and like pick up on all these clues and like all the things that some of the characters say to him, some of the things that he says, I kind of feel like it's more like a psychological journey rather than like a noir style mystery, even though it's presented very much like a noir style mystery. So, I mean, if you're okay with all that, with knowing that it's not going to be resolved, then I think you might kind of dig it. I mean, you should probably like take a look at it, especially if you're fascinated by those like creepy, like ominous, like analog videos with like cryptic origins. Like if you're real into that kind of stuff, or like ARGs, like analog type ARGs, then you'll probably be into this, because this very much has that kind of like vibe to it. This is kind of in the same ballpark as movies like The Conspiracy, which came out in 2012, which I think I reviewed. It's a little bit like Censor, which I just talked about not too long ago, from 2021, and a little bit like Barbarian Sound Studio, which is also from 2012, which I also talked about a while back. So it's not exactly like those, but it's kind of in the same ballpark as that. So if you're into that kind of stuff, then this one is definitely worth watching. And like I said, it's one that I think I liked it better after I finished watching, and I was like thinking about it, you know what I mean? Like I was thinking about it and like reading other, taking notes about it and stuff like that. And I was just kind of like, oh, I see. So it's a lot more clever than I thought it was, like at first blush, I guess. But as I said, your mileage is going to vary, but I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. Even though I kind of like it better in retrospect than it did. I liked it a lot when I was watching it, but I think I liked it better like the more I thought about it. And I definitely will be rewatching this one again, because this definitely seems like another movie to like kind of nerd out about, which like I said is funny because it's almost kind of like a meta statement. It's like this guy like lost his fucking marbles, like you know, finding all these connections or like looking into all these theories, and then it's almost kind of like inviting you to do the same thing with the movie itself, which, you know, I was like, oh, okay, I see what you did there. That's pretty cool. But yeah, it's definitely worth watching. It's on Amazon Prime, probably some other streaming services as well. And that'll do it for this Flickers of Fear. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.